Okay, guys, and we're back with another episode of the Seth Solo Side Quest. I'm Seth from the Lonely Stoner podcast, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about if Rory MacDonald is the biggest waste of talent in MMA history, or the biggest wasted potential, or biggest disappointment. Because early on in this guy's career, he had a lot of hype, and he was supposed to be coming into the UFC as the next GSP. You know, he was meant to be the prodigal son to GSP. You know, he's a Canadian guy coming out of Ferraz's gym. Has a slightly different background to GSP. Was widely regarded as one of the first guys to just train MMA, which, in my opinion, it probably was. It probably was bollocks when that was the media hype, because that was Joe Rogan and all these guys saying that. It probably was bollocks. It probably did have guys that had done this before, but that was the narrative they ran with Rory MacDonald. And to be fair, in his career, especially early on, he was showing that he was very well rounded, right? And he was stopping guys with knockouts, submissions, not knockouts, but like TKOs, submissions, decisions, like a wide range of different types of finishes as well. You know, you'd be seeing rear naked chokes, arm bars, actually mostly rear naked chokes throughout his career. Rear naked chokes and arm bars, mostly his favourite submissions. But yeah, a lot of decisions here and the occasional TKO. I'm going to talk about his career mainly once he got to the UFC and probably post 2011. So he beats Nate Diaz, he beats BJ Penn, even though Nate Diaz was never anything special, particularly even at welterweight, and BJ Penn was probably past his prime. Even then, BJ Penn had 8 losses on his record, and that was in 2012, right? Jake Ellenberger, who at the time probably would have been quite a decently respected UFC contender at that point, beats him in a unanimous decision. Then he loses a split decision to Robbie Lawler. And you have to understand, at the time that loss happened, that is quite a bad loss for a guy who's supposed to be sort of up and coming, where even back then, a guy like Robbie Lawler, Robbie Lawler was still widely regarded as a guy who'd been around for a long time, a guy who's sort of fringe world level, not really going to be able to make a run for the world title. Of course, that loss wouldn't age too badly because it was a split decision to Robbie Lawler, who then went on to become champ. But at that time, no one would have tipped Robbie Lawler to become welterweight champion, right? But he loses a split decision to him, and then he enters 2014, and this is when he goes dummy on them, bro. This is when he makes that run. He beats Damian Maia via decision, beats Tyron Woodley by decision, and then TKOs Tariq Safadine. And then from there, he gets a world title shot against Robbie Lawler. Now, majority of people will say this is the fight that really... It didn't end Rory MacDonald's career, because Rory MacDonald would go on to fight for another 8 years. You know, another 7-8 years. So you can't say that fight ended his career, but people would say that was the fight that, when basically Rory MacDonald quit the sport. Now, like I said, I can't say he ended his career, and I can't really say he quit the sport, because he went on to fight for, like I said, another 7 years. But you look after this loss, you look the way you see the way Rory MacDonald looked, and then even obviously he loses to Robbie Lawler. That was a war. He got stopped in the 5th round. A lot of people remember that fight and think of it as a decision loss. Rory MacDonald got stopped in that fight and took a ton of damage in it too. A ton of damage. Now, he then goes to fight Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. This is a fight I can't even remember actually happened. Says unanimous decision victory for Stephen Thompson. So I'm assuming Wonderboy pretty much outpointed Rory MacDonald. I can't say really whether he dominated him or not, you know. Then he leaves the UFC at this point. After back-to-back losses, he leaves the UFC and joins Bellator, where he beats Paul Daly via rear naked choke and then beats Douglas Lima to become, I believe that would have been the Bellator welterweight champion at that point. His next fight is against Gegard Mousasi, who is a middleweight. I believe that fight was at middleweight. And Gegard stops him in the second round via ground and pound. He then fights Neiman Gracie, a guy who I couldn't tell you the first thing about him, apart from the fact that he's a Gracie. beat him, and Neiman Gracie was undefeated at the time, but I think I do remember this vaguely. Even at the time, thinking, Neiman Gracie's not beating Rory MacDonald. Like everyone wanted him to, because we would have wanted the Gracie name to be a world champion. A Gracie become a world champion in 2019. That's amazing. We all wanted that to happen. That wasn't going to happen though. He then rematches Douglas Lima and loses. And at this point, Bellator folds, and now he's in PFL, where he's fighting nobodies and losing to a lot of them too. So he goes to PFL, he fights Curtis Millender, beats him. Then he fights Gleason Tebow and Ray Cooper III, and they both beat him via decision. Right? Gleason Tebow was a lightweight. Not a very good one either, might I remind you. Dude was a journeyman. Dude was never, at his peak, he was probably fringe world level. So I'm talking, I'd be surprised if he was ever ranked higher than 7 or 8 in his career. At his peak. And he's far removed from that. And that's a peak at lightweight. Whereas Rory MacDonald was a guy who was a Bellator welterweight champion, fought for UFC world titles as well. How are you losing to Gleason Tebow? Now, it was a split decision, so it's a split decision, and I didn't watch that fight. So I can't speak on the performance. Maybe Rory got robbed. That happens in split decisions in MMA, maybe. But come on, bro. It's Gleason Tebow. Gleason Tebow is old, bro. He's very old. Ray Cooper III, couldn't tell you the first thing about him as well. Then he fights his brother, Brett Cooper. I'm joking, that's not his brother. Well, I don't think it is. And he beats him via rear naked choke. That's the last win of Rory MacDonald's career. The last win, that was in 2022. He then goes on to fight in PFL 2 more times against Sedabu Sai and Delano Taylor, and they both beat him, with Delano Taylor stopping him in the first round. Now, for a guy in Robbie Lawler who had so much... Not Robbie Lawler, why I keep saying Robbie Lawler? A guy like Rory MacDonald who had so much hype coming into his career, and had, for a very long time, a really good record as well. But it goes to show that one big war really can, turn your career around. And really, one big war in terms of the trajectory. Even at that point, even though Rory MacDonald, he did have that split decision loss to Robbie Lawler, but he recovered from that and he went on that run, those 3 fights. And you're thinking, okay, he's fighting for the world title. He doesn't win it, but he goes in a war, one of the best fights we've ever seen. So, okay, maybe his stock drops a bit, but it shouldn't be plummeting like that. His stock drops a bit, and then he shoots back up again, and he continues to rebuild, and maybe second time round he wins that world title, but he loses that fight and he never regains that peak again. He never regains that peak, and even in his performances, even in his wins, he felt gun shy. He did. He felt like he had quit the sport. Mentally he'd quit the sport. Whereas physically he hadn't quit, because he probably likely still needed money. If he was going to live a comfortable life for the rest of his life, he probably still needed money. So he physically couldn't quit. Meaning he could show up to training. He could train pretty hard, get himself into pretty good shape. But when he was in there, when the going got tough, he wouldn't be willing to put what he put himself through once before against Robbie Lawler, and he didn't even win. He's thinking, I'm never going to put myself through all of that again to not even win. I'd rather lose. Excuse me. I'd rather lose. And we've seen post that a lot of fights he's fought, even these past couple of years, against guys who aren't that good. They've stopped him. They've beaten him. Right? And Rory MacDonald is not old. He's only 35. And when these fights in PFL were happening 3 years ago, he was only 33. That's not old. That's back end. Sure, that's back end. But half these guys who he lost to in PFL, I couldn't even name them. I've not got their names in front of me anymore. I couldn't even name those guys. And they're beating Rory MacDonald. Yeah, it's clear to see he physically quit. No, he mentally quit before he physically quit. I think now he's retired. But like I said, that really begs us the major question here. Is Rory MacDonald one of the biggest wasted talents or wasted potentials in MMA history? Let me know what you guys think. Another episode of the Seth Solo Side Quest in the bag, and I'm out. Peace.